we will talk about how information is organized in memory. And you will see that this is basically actually talking about cognition purely, but it of course also applies to social cognition, in that social information is also just a type of information that can be stored in memory. Now, here, first of all, this is the really basic idea, is that there is something happening in the world. There's some information about what's going on, and we perceive this information through a filter, basically, of our perception. Of course, we can't memorize everything that is going on because we don't even realize everything that is going on. So for something to be able to enter our memory, we have to perceive it somehow, hear it or see it or smell it. And this perception may, of course, already have like some faults, but we will speak about that later on. But so the idea, the first basic idea, is that there is information in the world and we perceive it, so we take it in, and then as we take it in, we have to encode it somehow. So there's some function going on in our minds that makes it possible to represent the information that we receive from the world. And then this represented information we can put in storage. And this storage is basically the main idea of memory. So this is the place where our past is kept alive. Ooh, that was oddly philosophical. And from storage, we can then again retrieve memories. So I can now rummage in the back of my mind to try to think back to what I ate for dinner yesterday. And that would be retrieval. So the chain here is there's information, I perceive it, I have to encode it and represent it in my mind. Then it can be stored, and from the storage I can retrieve it. But it's not only this unidirectional way in which memory, we can deal with memory, but there are some bidirectional influences. So the type of memory that I already have stored might influence what I am actually encoding. So if I have a specific memory stored about the dinner I ate yesterday, let's say that was a curry, and I might encode differently information about someone suggesting to me that I should eat curry again today, right? Because I already had curry yesterday, how I think about curry today, how I represent the idea of curry today may be different. And the same is true for the relation between storage and retrieval. So of course I can retrieve what is in storage, but also the other way around, there is an influence in the sense that what I have just retrieved might influence how specific information is organized in my storage unit. So if I've just accessed information, and not stick with the curry, if I've just accessed information about curry, other related aspects of my memory might be moving to the forefront of my memory, sort of queuing up to be retrieved next. So for instance, rice, or thinking about vacations in Thailand. That might be closer to the tip of my tongue than usually. So there is also an influence of what I've just received back into what is still in storage. And that goes to show that the influence between our memory, our storage, and what we do with it, so encode and retrieve, is not only unidirectional, but it goes in both directions. And on all these different facets, there might be different influencing factors that create it so that we make mistakes with the stuff that we memorize. Maybe let's not think about them as mistakes, but as like artifacts. There's interesting stuff going on about our memory. Now, if we wanted to think about memory as in how much memory capacity do we have, here's a question for you. How would you find out the survival time of information in our storage, in memory, without meaning getting in the way? Take a moment to pause this video and think about this question. How would you find out how long information survives in memory without any specific meaning getting in the way. Okay, welcome back, and I hope you had an interesting time trying to figure out how this could be achieved. You're not the only one who's ever thought about this. Indeed, there's some classic psychology that we're going to talk about now. A classic study, maybe, let's call it that, by Ebbinghaus in 1855, who tried to study memory in a clean way without meaning getting in the way, exactly what we try to do. So what do I mean by without meaning getting in the way? Well, he wanted to make sure that there would be no influence of earlier memories, because you could say, given that I had curry yesterday, it might be easy for me to remember the word curry today. And without triggering influence of associations. So perhaps if you talk to me about if you tell me to memorize the color brown, I will think about a teddy bear, and then that produces a positive association in me, and therefore it makes it more likely that I will be able to remember that I'm supposed to remember teddy bears. And we want to rule that out. So the way that Ebbinghaus went about this was by himself actually memorizing 2,000 nonsense syllables, such as XAF, JEL, ZOP, and so on. And it was always this kind of pattern. So it was always consonant, vowel, consonant. And so he memorized 2,000 of these. And now, what do you think he found? You could take a moment to try to read this curve and tell us or tell yourself actually, what you think the finding in Ebbinghaus's self-experiment was. So I'm going to help you interpret this graph. So what we see is on the x-axis, we have time, and on the y-axis, we have the retention rate in percent. So out of the 2,000 syllables, how many percent did Ebbinghaus himself manage to recollect? And so we have data points for different points in time. The first data point is after 20 minutes. And there, Ebbinghaus was still able to recollect about 60% of the syllables that he had just tried to study, just tried to memorize. An hour in, it already dropped down to 44%. 9 hours in, we were at about 36%. After 1 day, he was able to still remember or retrieve from memory about a third of the original syllables. After 2 days, 27%, 6 days, 25%, 31 days, about 20%. So we have this hyperbolic curve of forgetting. And that's one of the very classic psychology pieces of literature. Now, what happens, or is there something we can do to make it easier for us to keep information in memory? Probably you are experts about this because you're taking part in a course for university. That means in the end we'll have to write an exam, and you know how to study for exams. What do? Do you just commit stuff to memory once? Hopefully it's a bit more meaningful than nonsense syllables. No. What you do is you rehearse. You do active recall, and you repeat the things that you're trying to commit to memory so that they will stay there better. And now here are forgetting curves for repetition. So if after the first day you repeat something and then just keep going, you can see that the retention rate is higher than if you only try to commit stuff to memory once and then no repetitions. If you repeat things not only on the first day but also on the second day after your initial commit to memory, you can see that again the retention rate over time is higher. If you don't only repeat once, not also twice, but 3 times, you can see the retention rate is even better. So the key here being that repetition via active recall helps a little bit against forgetting. So we've seen that repetition helps against forgetting. But it's not only how often we try to do active recall that helps us keep information in memory. But there are other factors that influence how well we can remember things. One of them is how important the memory is to us, or what kind of like a special event the memory is related to. And now I want to raise a question here, which again, there's a brief trigger warning for. So this deals with an event in history that could potentially raise traumatic experiences for you. If you would rather avoid talking or hearing me talk about this or thinking about it, please skip forward until you don't see any yellow slides anymore, but we are back to blue slides. So the question that I want to ask is why special events are more easily kept in memory, and I want to highlight this by asking you about your recollections about 9/11. So I want to ask you to remember what you did during 9/11, and so I can tell you what I did when 9/11 occurred. I was on a class trip. And I remember that one of my classmates had a radio and another classmate had a phone, like a mobile phone. And that was when I was at that age, that was still not usual. So not all of us had a phone, but so the classmate who had the radio heard on the radio about 9/11 and then told everyone about it. We were super freaked out. And then the one person who had a mobile phone got called by their parents, and we were also super freaked out about that. So I have very vivid memories about this actually, and maybe so do you. So, and we call these kinds of memories that are highly detailed snapshots burned into our memories. We call these flashbulb memories, and these we find often we find often around events that were surprising, shocking, emotionally meaningful. And here, the important bit is this meaning. And meaning can be a trigger for why specific events are more easily kept in memory. But now, leaving behind the idea of flashbulb memories, let's take a look at how information is stored in memory. So this is again a purely sort of from a cognitive perspective, how does it work? What is the mechanics? And first of all, we differentiate two types of memory: short-term memory and long-term memory. So short-term memory for anything where you just have to remember something for a couple of minutes and then it's gone again. Long-term memory, this is the memory that you carry around with yourself for a long time, where you can, I ask you in 2 years and you still know about this. So in long-term memory, we are taking we're taking a look at some more facets. So on the one hand, we have the explicit type of memory or declarative type of memory that's stored in long-term storage. And this is pieced together out of 3 facets. So one, episodic memory, that means context-specific memory, stuff about situations. We have autobiographical memory, so memories about your own life, and semantic memory, that is memories about general principles as they apply to your environment. So this would be the explicit type of memory, and then we also have implicit memory, where again we usually think about 3 different facets. Sometimes this is also seen rather as 2 facets and not as 3. So priming, we can discuss whether we think this is part of actual memory, but the idea of priming is that there's some activation of networks in our memory because of external influences. And then, so this is why I'm saying it's rather a process that acts upon memory as opposed to a feature of memory. But it's also sometimes seen as part of long-term memory. That's why here in this overview I have it there. But as part of implicit memory and more conservatively speaking, I would include the following 2, which would be procedural memory, so things about motor skills, how do I walk? And then perceptual implicit memory, so my experience of the world. And this is a general model of how our memory works.